My name is Marin Whitfield, and I am 65 years old. I've always thought of myself as steady, practical, the kind of woman who keeps lists, plans ahead, and expects life to follow a reasonable pattern. That belief ended the morning Walter didn't wake up. He had been sitting in his favorite armchair, reading the paper like any other Saturday. And then, just like that, he was gone. A heart attack, the doctor said later, sudden and merciless. I stared at him for what felt like hours, half expecting him to cough, stir, something, anything, but the quiet was absolute. The house felt impossibly empty. Sunlight streamed through the living room windows, glinting off the brass lamp and the family photos on the mantel, but it brought no warmth. I moved mechanically, straightening the throw pillows, folding his robe over the back of the chair. His slippers were still under the ottoman, and I could see the faint crease where he had rested his foot. Every small detail was a cruel reminder that he would never move again. I had to call people. Funeral arrangements, relatives, friends, notifications. Each task felt like wading through molasses. My hands shook as I dialed the numbers I'd known by heart for decades. The voices on the other end, family friends, neighbors, distant cousins, blurred into a low hum, a reminder that life moved on, even when mine had stopped. Then there was Cordelia, my daughter, my only child. I thought of her immediately. She lived in Omaha with her husband, Barnaby, and their busy lives often kept her away from Des Moines. Normally, she would call at least once a week, checking in. But in the moment I needed her presence most, she felt impossibly far. I could almost hear her polite, distracted voice telling me everything was fine, as if fine could ever exist in this house without Walter. I picked up the phone and dialed her number, listening to it ring endlessly, the sound harsh in the quiet room. When she finally answered, her voice was soft and sleepy, a Saturday morning tone that made me ache. "Hi, Mom," she said. There was no shock, no hesitation, just a casual greeting as if she were checking in from another world. My throat tightened. "Cordelia," I said, and my voice caught. "It's Walter. He passed away this morning." There was a pause, then a simple, "Oh," no gasp, no words of disbelief. The funeral, the suddenness, the 8 years of shared life all reduced to that flat acknowledgement. I could hear Barnaby in the background, murmuring about coffee, as if the news had merely interrupted their plans. My hands clenched around the receiver. I had to keep my composure, but inside I felt hollow, as if the house itself had swallowed me whole. I set the time for the service, made notes, and tried to focus on tasks. But every glance around the living room, every photo of Walter smiling on our travels or holding a sleeping Cordelia as a toddler, reminded me of everything I had lost. And in the back of my mind, the question gnawed. Would my daughter even show up for her own father's funeral? The day stretched ahead, heavy and gray, as I folded Walter's shirts and laid out his suit for the viewing. Each piece of clothing was a memory, a story, a fragment of our life together. I folded them carefully, as if folding them neatly could somehow preserve what we had, or at least contain my grief. Outside, the wind rattled the trees along our street, and I wondered how the world could continue so casually while my life had been fractured in an instant. The phone rang again, and I steeled myself, knowing that the call I was dreading most had yet to come. The next morning, the house was quieter than I could have imagined. The coffee brewed, the aroma filling the kitchen, but there was no warmth in the air. No conversation spilling from the living room as Walter had left behind. I poured myself a cup and sat at the table, staring at the steam curling from the mug, and tried to imagine Cordelia's voice here, the way she used to laugh at the smallest things, The way she'd argue with her father about trivial matters and then hug him before storming off. I dialed her number again. It rang, long and insistent, before she finally answered. "Hi, Mom," she said, sounding almost businesslike. No hesitation, no alarm in her voice, no sense that the world had shifted beneath us overnight. I felt a pang in my chest and held my composure. "Cordelia, it's me," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk about the funeral arrangements." She sighed audibly. "Mom, I know, but you know how it is. Barnaby's birthday is coming up, and we've already made plans. The restaurant, the guests. It's complicated to reschedule." Her words were polite, almost rehearsed, but the coldness cut deeper than any blunt refusal could have. I pressed, careful not to let my anger take over. "This is your father we're talking about. The man who raised you, loved you. And I know, Mom, I know," she interrupted gently. But firmly, "It's not that I don't care. There's a lot going on. Work, social events. Everything. I'll send flowers, I promise." There it was again, the same pattern that had crept in over the past few years. Excuses carefully phrased, compassion measured, attention divided, obligations prioritized over presence. I remembered the nights when she was a teenager, curled up on the couch with homework spread around her, and Walter beside her, patiently helping her understand math or physics. She had once been so eager to help, so present. Now, her attentions were selective, calculated, and her heart seemed further away than any distance could explain. I ended the call, a dull ache settling in my chest. Her absence in the past few years had been subtle at first. Fewer calls during the holidays, short visits, and then the casual avoidance, always for some event or obligation she deemed more pressing. At 37, married, with her own social and professional life, she had grown distant, not in a way that could be blamed on work or responsibilities, but in a way that suggested her priorities had shifted entirely. I wandered through the house, looking at photographs on the walls. There she was, 10 years old, smiling with Walter and me on the beach, holding his hand, her eyes wide with curiosity and trust. I traced the edges of the frame, remembering those days when our family felt whole and unshakable. How had she drifted so far? I brewed another cup of coffee, the bitter warmth doing little to steady the emptiness I felt. Every small sound, the tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator echoed in the hollow spaces where her presence once filled the home. Her absence was more than physical. It was the absence of care, attention, and the willingness to be present in the moments that mattered most. As I sat down, cradling the mug between my hands, the weight of disappointment settled over me like the morning fog. It wasn't only the grief over Walter anymore, it was the quiet realization that the daughter I had raised, nurtured, and cherished had quietly begun to choose another path, one that left our family and our shared history at a distance she seemed unwilling to bridge. I wandered into the living room, my fingers brushing over the edge of the piano Walter had insisted we keep, even though we rarely played. The polished surface reflected the morning sun, and for a moment, it was easy to imagine him sitting there, adjusting the music sheets, encouraging Cordelia to practice her scales. She had been so eager when she was young, her little fingers pressing each key with determination and joy. Walter had always been patient, leaning over her shoulder, giving quiet guidance, a soft smile that made her giggle whenever she hit a wrong note. I sank into the armchair he had occupied for decades, inhaling the faint scent of his cologne, the faint trace of coffee from the mornings we shared together. Memories flooded in, unbidden and relentless. Birthdays filled with laughter, the house decorated with balloons and streamers, friends and neighbors crowding into our modest dining room. Cordelia, eyes wide with excitement, tearing wrapping paper with a focus only a child possesses, and Walter lifting her into the air when she squealed with delight. Those were days of pure joy, simple celebrations that felt infinite at the time. Holidays had been our sanctuary, the rhythm of family life marking the passage of time in a way that felt safe. I remembered Thanksgiving mornings, the smell of roasted turkey mingling with the scent of pumpkin pies cooling on the counter. Cordelia would run through the house, chasing the family cat, her cheeks flushed with laughter. Her father playfully scolding her as he carved the turkey, and Christmas the pine tree laden with ornaments, the soft glow of lights reflecting off the windows. Walter reading aloud to her while I stitched presents under the tree. Those moments had built the scaffolding of our family life, each memory a brick in a home that now felt hollow without him. I thought of the small things that had made our home, vibrant Cordelia helping me in the garden, her tiny hands buried in the soil, learning the names of plants, the seasons, the slow miracle of life growing under our care. Walter had always been the one to teach her about constellations, pointing out stars in the summer sky, explaining their stories, their movements, the vastness of the universe in a way that made her eyes shine with curiosity and wonder. I remembered how she had clutched his hand during fireworks displays, her small fingers pressing into his, trusting him utterly. And then there were quiet evenings, the house dimly lit, when the three of us would sit together on the couch, Walter reading the newspaper, I with my knitting, and Cordelia sprawled across the cushions, telling us stories from her day at school. We would laugh at her exaggerations, Walter pretending to scold, and I watching the two of them, my heart full of gratitude for the simple ordinariness of these moments. Now, the same rooms felt cavernous and silent. The echoes of laughter and music seemed trapped in the walls, shadows of what had once been. Each photograph on the mantel, the beach vacations, her first piano recital. School plays reminded me that time had passed and that the warmth of our family had slowly eroded, almost imperceptibly, until this distance had become the new reality. I traced my finger along one frame Cordelia at 10 years old, her smile radiant, arms wrapped around Walter's neck, me standing beside them. I remembered that laughter, that joy, the way our world had seemed unbreakable, and I realized with a tightening in my chest that something had changed, something subtle at first, that had allowed the warmth to fade without notice. The memory was bittersweet, a reminder of love now tinged with sorrow, the contrast between then and now sharp and unavoidable. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me, each one a mixture of joy and ache, carrying me back to a time when our home had been full of life, full of love, and full of hope that it would never end. The phone rang again mid-morning, slicing through the quiet of the house like a sharp wind. I braced myself, knowing without needing to see the caller ID, Cordelia's voice came through, measured and calm, as if she were rehearsing every word. Mom, we need to talk about the funeral. I sat down heavily, gripping the edge of the kitchen table. Cordelia, I said slowly, trying to steady my voice. It's about your father. We need to finalize the arrangements. There was a pause on the other end, a brief hesitation I had not expected. Then she spoke, her tone almost casual. I know, Mom, I know. But there's something I need to ask. Barnaby's birthday falls on the same day as the funeral. We've already booked the restaurant, invited friends. I was wondering if we could postpone it. I froze. My hands tightened around the phone. I could barely form the words. Postpone. The funeral, I whispered, the incredulity heavy in my chest. Because of a birthday. Yes, she said, quickly. It's just one day apart. It would be so much easier for us to combine things. Don't worry. "Mom, your father won't find out, and I'll come by later to place flowers. It's just more convenient." I wanted to scream, to cry, to tell her that convenience had no place in the reckoning with death. Walter had spent decades building a life around love, patience, and attention to the people he cared about. And now, his own daughter was willing to let that life be disregarded for a party, a celebration of another's self-importance. I don't understand," I said finally, my voice catching. "This is your father we're talking about. The man who raised you, who loved you, who was here for every small thing in your life. How can you even consider this?" Cordelia's voice shifted slightly, a defensiveness creeping in. "Mom, I'm not saying I don't care, it's complicated. Barnaby has been planning this for weeks. There are friends coming from out of town. It's important to him. And you know how it is, changing plans at the last minute can ruin everything." Her words landed like blows. I could almost see her, poised in her carefully controlled world, treating the funeral as a scheduling conflict, a checkbox on a calendar. The daughter I had spent years raising, who had once carried my hand through school halls, who had curled up on the couch during long winter nights to read by my side, had become a stranger in her priorities. "I can't believe this," I whispered. "He's a man you married, and you're willing to let him dictate your decisions over saying goodbye to your father, over honoring the man who made you who you are." She hesitated, and I could hear the faint rustle of papers, perhaps the invitations she had carefully stacked, reminders of social obligations. "Mom, it's not about disrespect. I'm trying to balance things. It's only one day, my father's life, my grief, Walter's final farewell, all reduced to a single, inconvenient day." The moral outrage churned in my stomach, a bitter knot tightening as I imagined the ceremony, the empty space where her presence should have been, her laughter replaced by the polite echoes of acquaintances who had gathered to pay their respects. I clutched the phone, the weight of betrayal pressing down. Cordelia's priorities had become unmistakably clear. This was not a simple request. It was a choice, and the choice cut deeper than any words could explain. In that moment, I understood that my daughter's world no longer centered around family, around love, or around duty, but around convenience, comfort, and the approval of another. The house felt colder, suddenly, the air heavy with the finality of what had been asked, and the realization that the life I had known, the daughter I had loved, and the family we had built had all shifted beyond recognition in a single phone call. The day stretched out like a gray ribbon, heavy with the silence Walter had left behind. I moved through the house on autopilot, checking the guest list, confirming the funeral home, and making small decisions that now felt monumental. Each task carried the weight of finality. Each phone call a reminder that the world had continued spinning while mine had stopped. I arranged the chairs in the living room, where friends and family would gather after the service. Walter had always been particular about the placement of furniture, insisting that the living space feel balanced and welcoming. I tried to honor his memory by following those unspoken rules, but the emptiness around me made the effort feel hollow. Every step echoed in the house, each sound magnified in the absence of his steady presence. The photographs on the mantel seemed to watch me, faces frozen in time. Cordelia at 6, grinning in a sunlit park. Walter at 30, holding me close on a rainy day. Our small family at Christmas, laughter spilling from the frame into my mind. Each image reminded me of the life we had built, and each one reminded me of what was now gone. The silence pressed in, and I realized the weight of my solitude grief was not only for Walter, but for the space he had filled, the comfort he had provided, the routines that had given life structure. I went through Walter's clothes, folding his shirts with meticulous care, placing them in the suitcase we had never used for travel. The faint scent of his cologne lingered, clinging to the fabric, an invisible echo of him. I imagined him walking through the door, greeting me with that gentle smile, commenting on something trivial that would have made me laugh. The thought brought a tightness to my chest, a mix of longing and pain that made my hands tremble. Outside, the wind rustled the trees along the quiet street, carrying with it the distant hum of morning traffic. Life moved on, indifferent to the loss that had upended mine. I stepped onto the porch for a moment, the cool air brushing against my cheeks, and looked at the empty driveway. No car, no familiar figure, just the shadows of memories that seemed to stretch longer in Walter's absence. I prepared the small things for the wake, setting out napkins, candles, and the few vases I could find. Even in these practical tasks, I felt the pang of solitude. Where was Cordelia? Where was the daughter who had once clung to my hand, who had begged for bedtime stories, who had whispered secrets on long car rides? The thought of her absence, especially now, stung sharper than any grief I had felt moments before. I paused in the living room, hands resting on the edge of the piano Walter had loved. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting, as if the house itself understood the loss it contained. I closed my eyes and imagined his voice, gentle and calm, reminding me to breathe, to take one moment at a time. I sat there for a long while, letting the quiet wrap around me, the solitude heavy but necessary, a space where grief could live and where I could begin to reckon with the absence of both my husband and the daughter who had chosen another path. Every decision I made, every small act of preparation, was a tribute to him, a way to honor the life we had shared even in the absence of the family we had hoped would be by my side. The day moved slowly, each hour a reminder that I must carry on, alone in the grief, and yet determined to keep Walter's memory alive in the way only I could. The sun had barely begun to climb over the rooftops of Des Moines when I arrived at Caspar Winthrop's office, a place I had known for over 2 decades. The polished wood and orderly shelves, stacked with folders and law books, always gave me a sense of stability. Today, however, it felt like the walls were closing in, pressing me to confront a decision I had postponed for years, even though the moment had finally arrived. Caspar looked up from his desk as I entered, his glasses catching the morning light. "Marin," he said softly, a note of concern threading his usual professional calm. "I heard about Walter. My condolences. I can't imagine what you're going through." His words were sincere, and yet, the weight of what I had to do hung heavier than grief alone. I nodded, setting my purse on the edge of the desk. "Thank you. Caspar, I need to discuss the will." My voice was quiet, but there was an undercurrent of resolve that surprised even me. He gestured for me to sit, and I took the chair opposite him, hands folded tightly in my lap. "I assume you're thinking of adjustments," Caspar asked, leaning forward, his pen poised over a notepad. "Yes," I said. "Everything." I paused, swallowing hard. "Cordelia will not inherit our home or the savings. I've been patient. I've been forgiving. But her choices, her absence, her disregard for Walter, it cannot go unaddressed. The rest will be allocated to causes Walter and I cared about, charities that reflect the values we lived by." Caspar blinked, clearly processing the intensity behind my words. "Marin, that is a significant step. Are you certain you know she can contest it if she chooses?" "I am certain," I said firmly, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease slightly as I spoke. "This is not about revenge. It's about principle." about recognizing who values what is given, who honors it. Cordelia has made her priorities clear. He set down his pen and studied me for a long moment. You are aware this may create a rift. It may deepen the distance, perhaps permanently. Are you prepared for that? I looked out the window at the city waking up, the traffic moving in its usual rhythms, people hurrying through lives that seemed impossibly small against the vastness of grief and choice. I've already lived through the distance. I said, This is simply the logical conclusion. If she cannot honor her family, then she cannot inherit from it. Casper nodded slowly, respect in his eyes. Very well. We can draft the documents to make them legally sound, minimize the risk of contest. I can arrange for witnesses and, if necessary, a mental evaluation to ensure the will's validity. I want it airtight. I replied. No ambiguity, no chance to question my judgment. I am of sound mind, and I am acting entirely of my own volition. This must be final, for everyone's sake, including mine. We began to work through the details, discussing the percentages, the organizations, and the careful distribution of personal items. Half of the house and all liquid assets would go to a children's reading charity that Walter and I had supported for years. A quarter would go to a local animal shelter, something Walter always felt strongly about, and the remaining quarter to a cancer fund, honoring the many lives touched by illness. I even specified small personal items, photographs, jewelry, keepsakes bequeathed to the charities, ensuring that nothing would be left to sentiment alone. As we finalized the plan, Casper leaned back in his chair, adjusting his glasses. This is a powerful statement. Marin, it reflects both your principles and your grief. It will be difficult for her, certainly, but it is clear, and it is fair to the legacy of Walter and yourself. I nodded, a tight knot of relief and lingering sorrow settling in my chest. Making this decision had been agonizing, but the clarity it brought was undeniable. It was no longer simply about loss. It was about establishing boundaries, enforcing values, and ensuring that the life Walter and I had built would be honored. Even in his absence, when I left Casper's office, the morning sun felt different, brighter somehow, a little more certain. I walked through the streets of Des Moines with my coat drawn tightly around me, the weight of grief still heavy but tempered by the resolve that, finally, I had acted according to principle. The house, the inheritance, the memories, all of it would endure, and it would endure rightly. And in that certainty, I realized the path forward was no longer just about mourning. It was about protecting what we had built, safeguarding our values, and facing the consequences of truth even if it meant standing alone. The day of the funeral arrived gray and heavy, the sky low and overcast, mirroring the heaviness in my chest. I dressed Walter's suit carefully, straightened my own coat, and examined my reflection in the hallway mirror. My hair was pulled back neatly, but the faint lines around my eyes betrayed the nights spent awake, wrestling with grief and disbelief. The house was quiet, every corner holding the absence of his presence, every room echoing the weight of what had been lost. Neighbors arrived first, carrying casseroles, bouquets, and gentle words of sympathy. Mrs. Fenwick, a friend of both Walter and me, stood by the door, wringing her hands in quiet concern. He was a remarkable man, she said softly, handing me a small bouquet of lilies. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. The words felt inadequate, but the gesture carried the warmth of a community that had known him, that had watched him build not only houses, but a life of meaning and care. Friends from Walter's work came next. Men and women who had spent decades with him in offices, on construction sites, in meetings over blueprints and budgets. They shared memories, his insistence on doing things right, his quiet humor, the way he treated colleagues as family. Each story reminded me of the man I had known, the husband I had loved, and the father my daughter had abandoned. Their words filled the room with laughter and tears, but also with the undeniable truth of Walter's impact. Relatives trickled in, some I had not seen in years. Theodore, my brother, appeared with his wife and 2 grown sons. Their presence was steady and reassuring, a reminder that family could still offer support even when others failed. Theodore's eyes met mine, and in that glance, I found understanding. A silent acknowledgement that loss could be shared without judgment. Throughout the gathering, I kept glancing at the entrance, half expecting Cordelia to appear. I imagined her walking through the door, pausing at the threshold, unsure of how to approach, conflicted between duty and convenience, but she never came. The absence of her presence struck me sharper than the cold drizzle that began to fall outside. The hollow space where she should have been echoing louder than any words spoken. Pastor Elwood arrived to lead the service, his calm voice and measured words carrying the solemnity the occasion demanded. He spoke of Walter's kindness, his dedication, the life he had built, and the love he had shown to everyone he encountered. I listened, holding back tears, a quiet pride swelling in my chest. This was the man I had shared my life with, the man who had loved me, and now the world bore witness to him, even if his daughter chose not to. As the service ended, people approached to offer condolences, shake my hand, or share a memory of Walter. Each interaction reminded me of his legacy, the lives he had touched, and the respect he had earned. And yet, the ache of Cordelia's absence lingered. I imagined her at a table with Barnaby and friends, celebrating a birthday, oblivious to the depth of loss surrounding the house she had left behind. The coffin was lowered into the ground, the rain falling steadily, turning the earth dark and rich. I threw a handful of soil, whispering words only I could hear, honoring the life we had shared. Theodore helped guide the few remaining guests back to their cars, his presence steady and grounding. I stood there a moment longer, watching the coffin disappear beneath the earth, feeling both the finality of death and the ongoing absence of the daughter who had chosen convenience over love. When we returned to the house for the small gathering afterward, stories of Walter's life continued to unfold, but my thoughts drifted. I moved through the rooms, arranging the plates, setting out refreshments, but my mind remained on the empty chair where Cordelia should have been. The silent acknowledgement of a choice made, and the understanding that some lessons in life were learned too late, if at all. The drive home from the funeral felt longer than it should have, the streets of Des Moines gray and damp, mirroring the hollow ache inside me. As I pulled into the driveway, the house loomed larger than ever, its brick walls seeming both familiar and foreign. Walter's car was gone, as it always would be, leaving the garage empty, the echoes of his movements absent. I sat for a long moment behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel, letting the quiet settle over me like a thick fog. Stepping inside, I was struck by the stillness. The house was too large, the rooms too empty, the furniture too perfect and uninhabited. Every corner whispered reminders of the life Walter had built, the routines we had shared, and the absence that now defined them. I wandered from room to room, touching the surfaces, straightening the few items that bore his hand, but the effort felt small and futile. Even his favorite chair by the window, the one he had claimed each morning to read the paper, seemed hollow without the weight of his presence. I made coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, but it did little to chase the loneliness. The quiet was almost unbearable, each tick of the clock loud against the silence. I imagined Walter moving through the rooms, tidying, muttering under his breath, humming softly as he worked. And then I remembered the evenings we had spent together, sitting in the living room with Cordelia, laughter spilling over from shared stories. the comfort of family surrounding us. Now, only the ghost of those moments remained. I tried to focus on practical matters, sorting through mail, organizing the small mountain of notes left by friends and neighbors, deciding what to keep and what to file. Each decision felt heavy, weighted with both grief and the sudden realization that I would be making them alone from now on. The thought of stepping into a life without Walter was daunting, a reality I could not yet fully comprehend. I walked through the garden, once alive with our joint care, now muted by absence. The tulips Walter had loved to plant were beginning to sprout. But without him, the act of tending them felt incomplete. I touched the cold stems, imagining his hands beside mine, guiding, teaching, sharing the simple joy of nurturing life. The world moved on outside, indifferent, while I grappled with the sudden shift in my own. In the empty house, I began to notice small rhythms I had never appreciated before: the soft creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant barking of a neighbor's dog. Alone, I started to recognize that life would continue, even if it did so without the companion who had anchored me for decades. I began the first tentative steps of adjustment, setting routines, establishing small projects to occupy the mind, to give structure to days that otherwise threatened to collapse into grief. By evening, I found myself in Walter's study, sitting in the chair he had loved. I let the quiet wash over me, listening to the silence, feeling the emptiness, but also sensing the first stirrings of something I had not expected: resilience. The house was empty, yes, but it was still a home. And though the weight of loss pressed down, the knowledge that I could endure, that I could navigate this new reality, offered the faintest flicker of hope amidst the shadows of sorrow. The phone rang mid-afternoon, a sharp interruption in the heavy quiet of the house. I had been sitting at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my coffee cup, trying to find some rhythm in the stillness, when the sound startled me. The caller ID flashed Cordelia's name, and a familiar twist of anxiety tightened in my chest. I had dreaded this call, yet I knew it would come eventually. I picked up, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Hello," I said, my words careful, measured. "Hi, Mom," Cordelia began, her tone hesitant, almost unsure. There was a slight pause, a faint crack in the practiced calm that had always defined her voice lately. I wanted to call, and I'm sorry I missed the funeral." I swallowed, the words both expected and yet still stinging. "Cordelia," I said softly, "this wasn't about schedules or convenience. It was about your father, about saying goodbye. Do you understand what you've missed?" There was a quiet sigh, almost imperceptible, and then she spoke, choosing each word carefully. "I do. I didn't want to what I asked," though the answer was painfully obvious. "To disrupt your plans, to inconvenience someone else. Your father was gone, Cordelia, and you were elsewhere. That is not something that can be mitigated by flowers or calls." Her voice faltered for a moment, a subtle tremor betraying discomfort. She had never allowed herself in conversation with me before. "I know. I really am sorry. I thought I could make it up. I can come later. I can—" "No," I interrupted gently but firmly. "It's not about coming later. It's about being present when it mattered most. 8 months of her illness, and your presence was scarce, fleeting, and perfunctory. And now, at the moment of goodbye, you chose to prioritize something else." A pause filled the line, heavy and reluctant. I could hear the faint rustle of papers or perhaps the fabric of her clothing as she shifted. "I didn't realize, I know I should have been there more. I was trying to balance. Work, Barnaby, everything." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the frustration pressing against the careful control I had tried to maintain. Trying to balance your father's final hours, trying to balance convenience over presence. That is not something that can be excused by a schedule or a party. Those months weren't neutral. Your absence was felt, deeply. Every day you weren't here. Her voice softened. Quieter now, as if finally conceding to the weight of what I was saying. I didn't mean to hurt either of you. I got caught up, and I didn't know how to. I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly, trying to steady the ache that clawed at my chest. Cordelia, this isn't simply about intention, but it's about awareness, about action. And the awareness was there. The choice was made. Every week, every visit that was skipped, every call that was abbreviated, you chose a path. You chose what mattered to you. I understand, Mom, she said softly, a hint of guilt threading through her words. I really do. I wish I had done things differently. I know, I said, the tension in my voice easing slightly, though the hurt remained. Words alone cannot undo months of absence, months of neglect, and selfish choices. It's something you'll have to reckon with, and it will take more than an apology to repair. There was silence for a moment, only the low hum of the refrigerator in the background. I could hear the faint intake of breath on her end, the uncertainty and regret that she could not yet reconcile with her actions. I'll try, she whispered. I really will. I let the words hang in the air, heavy and unresolved. Knowing that reconciliation would require more than this first call, more than her tentative promises. Some lessons were learned slowly, painfully, and with the full weight of the absence they had caused. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the curtains, casting long, warm beams across the living room. I sat on the sofa. A stack of old letters and cards spread out on the coffee table before me, their edges yellowed with time. Each one was a fragment of the life Walter and I had built, reminders of birthdays celebrated, milestones reached, and quiet, ordinary days that had shaped our family. I picked up a letter Cordelia had written when she was 8, the handwriting uneven but full of enthusiasm. Dear Mom and Dad, it began. Thank you for helping me learn my piano piece. I love when we play together. I traced the scrawled letters with my finger. The memory of those evenings flooding back. Walter had always been patient, guiding her small hands over the keys, smiling at every mistake, teaching her that effort and care mattered more than perfection. I had sat nearby, offering encouragement and praise. The three of us cocooned in warmth and quiet laughter. The pile included holiday cards from neighbors, postcards from family trips, and notes of encouragement from teachers and friends. Each one carried a memory, a moment of connection, a piece of the love we had poured into raising Cordelia. I remembered school recitals, the nervous excitement before each performance, Walter holding her hand tightly as she walked on stage, whispering reassurance that steadied her trembling. I had watched from the front row, my heart swelling with pride, feeling the simple joy of a family intertwined in support and care. As I sifted through the correspondence, I came across Walter's notes, small reminders to himself, or to me, lists of tasks, plans for the garden, thoughtful reminders about birthdays and anniversaries. They were evidence of the quiet diligence he had carried in every aspect of our lives, the small attentions that had made our home a sanctuary. I smiled through the sting in my chest, remembering how he would always insist on making things right, even in the smallest details. Memories of family dinners rose unbidden, the clatter of dishes, the aroma of home-cooked meals, Cordelia animatedly recounting her day while Walter and I exchanged glances, sharing a private smile of understanding. The holidays. the snow drifting outside, the tree lit with warm lights. The soft hum of music in the background, these ordinary moments had seemed endless at the time, but now they shone with an almost painful clarity. I paused over a photograph. One of my favorites, Walter, Cordelia, and me on the beach in California, her small arms wrapped tightly around him, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. Their smiles were wide and unguarded, the innocence of childhood captured in a single frame. I had spent countless nights reflecting on those smiles, wondering if we had done enough, if the guidance we had given, the lessons we had taught, had taken root. Raising Cordelia had been a careful balancing act of encouragement and discipline, freedom and structure. We had celebrated achievements, comforted disappointments, and shared the rhythms of everyday life with intention. Yet, as I sit in the stillness of our home without Walter, I cannot help but question whether those years were sufficient. Had we guided her well? Or had our best efforts somehow fallen short? The weight of uncertainty presses against me. The bittersweet knowledge that the daughter we raised now stands apart, shaped by choices beyond our control. I closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me. Piano lessons, bedtime stories, family vacations, quiet talks on the porch. Each recollection was a stitch in the tapestry of our life, a reminder of love given, care offered, and lessons taught. And yet, alongside the warmth of those moments, there is a lingering ache, the sense that despite all our devotion, some lessons were lost, some paths chosen by her, not by us. I stacked the letters carefully, placing them back into the box where they had been stored for years. The house was quiet around me, holding the echoes of laughter, the ghosts of joy and sorrow intertwined. I took a deep breath, knowing that our past had shaped the present in ways I could not undo. And as I gazed out the window at the fading light, I wondered if, in the absence of Walter's guidance and the warmth of those years, we had done enough, or if, unknowingly, we had let her drift too far. The envelope arrived on a breezy Wednesday morning, its crisp edges stark against the polished wood of Cordelia's desk. She recognized the familiar return address immediately. Caspar Winthrop, the lawyer who had handled her family's affairs for decades. Her pulse quickened, a flutter of curiosity and unease colliding in her chest. She sliced the paper open, expecting perhaps a simple update on her father's estate. But what she found inside made her hand tremble. The letter was precise, formal, and unyielding. It outlined the details of Walter Whitfield's will. Cordelia had been removed as an heir, all rights to the house and liquid assets revoked. The bulk of the estate had been redirected to charitable organizations that reflected her parents' lifelong commitments: children's reading programs, local animal shelters, and cancer foundations. Personal belongings, photographs, and keepsakes were also designated to be entrusted to these organizations. Every word in the letter was carefully crafted, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Cordelia's eyes darted back and forth across the page. She reread phrases, certain that a mistake had been made. "This can't be real," she muttered, her voice rising slightly with disbelief. She felt the blood drain from her face, replaced by a rising heat of anger and incredulity. How could her parents, her mother especially, take such a drastic step without so much as a warning? It felt like betrayal, cold and calculated. She sank into her chair, crumpling the letter briefly before smoothing it out and reading it again. Each line seemed to echo the months she had ignored Walter's declining health, the times she had chosen convenience over connection. The reality pressed in on her like the walls of a closed room. Her absence had consequences far beyond the immediate guilt she had tried to quiet. The anger surged next, fierce and undeniable. "This isn't fair," she said aloud, her voice shaking. "I'm his daughter. I have a right to this estate. I deserve this. They can't do this to me." Her hands clutched the edges of the letter, the paper crumpling under the pressure. She imagined confronting her mother, demanding explanations, accusing her of manipulation, of letting grief twist into punishment. Yet beneath the fury, a slow, gnawing unease began to take root. The letter did not merely punish her, it reflected principle, a moral reckoning for choices made. Each detail of disinheritance corresponded to the months she had spent absent, the times she had prioritized social obligations and her husband over the father who had raised her, who had been present in every meaningful moment of her childhood. The realization unsettled her. She could not simply dismiss the letter as spite or caprice. It was an undeniable reflection of her actions, her priorities, and the consequences that followed. She leaned back, the weight of the truth pressing on her chest. The room felt smaller suddenly. The sounds of the city outside muted. How had she let things reach this point? The thought of being legally excluded from the life she had always assumed was hers provoked both panic and sorrow. Every memory of childhood, of laughter, of Walter's quiet guidance, now clashed violently with the stark reality of her choices. Cordelia's eyes traveled to the framed photograph on her desk. Walter smiling warmly at her during a long-ago summer vacation. The image seemed to scold her, a silent reminder of love betrayed by absence and distraction. She felt the raw edges of guilt cutting into the anger, a tension between resentment and recognition that left her breathless. Finally, she pressed the letter to her chest. Closing her eyes, the consequences of her decisions were laid bare. Undeniable and irrevocable, the estate, the inheritance, the tangible proof of her father's life and legacy, everything had been redirected, and her role in it was gone. She could feel the weight of the choices she had made. The months of absence, the casual excuses, the prioritization of convenience over care, and now there was no escaping them. Her mind raced with possibilities, calls to the lawyer, demands for reversal, arguments about fairness. But beneath it all, a slow, insistent truth began to settle. She would have to confront not just the loss of material inheritance, but the reflection of her actions, the moral mirror her parents had held up for her, and the reckoning had just begun. The knock at the door was sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. I set down the kettle I had been using for tea and walked to the entrance, my heart tightening in anticipation. Cordelia's presence on the doorstep, framed by the afternoon light, was both familiar and foreign. Her face was flushed, eyes wide with emotion, and she clutched a folded envelope in her hand, the very one that had caused this upheaval. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." She stepped inside before I could respond, the tension in the air immediate and palpable. I led her to the living room, the space still heavy with the quiet of Walter's absence. I gestured to the chairs opposite mine. "Sit," I said, my voice calm but firm. She hesitated for only a moment before obeying. The envelope pressed tightly to her chest like a shield. "About the will," she began, the words barely a whisper. I can't believe you did this. How could you disinherit me? I'm your daughter. This is my father's estate." Her voice rose, cracking with a mix of anger and hurt. "I am aware of that." "Cordelia," I replied, keeping my tone steady, though my chest ached at the sight of her fury. But being a daughter is not merely a matter of blood or entitlement. It is about presence, about choices, about moral responsibility. You were absent when it mattered most. You prioritized convenience and another's celebration over your father's final farewell. Her hands tightened around the envelope. Convenience. That's what you think this is. It was a birthday, a special day for Barnaby. I couldn't just cancel everything. Her voice wavered, a mix of defensiveness and genuine confusion. I shook my head slowly. It was not a matter of convenience. Cordelia, it was a matter of conscience and loyalty for 8 months. While your father's health deteriorated, your presence was scarce. Perfunctory, you were not there for him. And now, at the very end, you chose another celebration over him. This decision is what the will reflects. She stared at me, eyes flashing with indignation. You're punishing me for being human. I tried to balance everything. Work, life, family. How could I have known that being absent would make you take such a drastic step? Humanity is not measured in excuses, I said quietly, the weight of years pressing into my voice. It is measured in choices. You made yours, and I am left to live with the consequences of both my loss and your absence. The will is a reflection of that truth. Tears welled in her eyes, but her defiance remained. So that's it. You've cut me off completely. Just like that. She shook the envelope, her knuckles white. I deserved a chance. A conversation before this. Before everything changed. You had chances. Cordelia, I said. The words firm, unyielding. Every week you skipped visits. Every call you shortened. Every excuse you offered, it was all a conversation you chose to ignore. The opportunity to be present and to honor your father's final days passed. The will is not vengeance, it is clarity. She leaned forward, voice rising again. You think this teaches me a lesson, that I will suddenly see the error of my ways because of some paper you've destroyed our relationship for money, for control. I held her gaze steadily, the ache in my chest mingling with resolve. It is not about money, Cordelia. It is about integrity, about recognizing what is right and understanding the weight of your actions. You cannot undo the past. You can only confront it. The room fell into tense silence. Her breathing shallow, mine steady. Finally, she lowered the envelope, trembling, eyes glistening with the first real acknowledgement of guilt. Though pride and confusion still lingered, the confrontation had reached its peak. The raw emotion between us a storm of heartbreak, regret, and moral reckoning. I leaned back in my chair, letting the tension settle, knowing that words alone could not mend what had been broken. Cordelia's choices had led us here, and whether she understood or fought blindly for inheritance, the truth of her absence and the consequences it brought were undeniable. The path to reconciliation, if it existed at all, would be long and uncertain, and it would require more than anger or apologies. It would demand recognition, reflection, and change. I motioned for Cordelia to remain seated, letting the silence stretch for a moment. Heavy with the weight of the confrontation, my gaze softened, and I began, carefully choosing my words. Cordelia, what I want you to understand is not punishment. It is principle, family, loyalty, the care we owe to those who raised us. These are not trivial matters. They define who we are and how we honor those we love. Her eyes lowered, and for the first time that afternoon, the defiance faltered. I continued, your father built his life on integrity, on attention to detail, on prioritizing those who mattered, the house we shared, the love we gave you. The moments we created, they were not merely obligations. They were investments in a bond that you chose to set aside. Cordelia's hands twisted in her lap. I didn't see it that way, she admitted, her voice quiet, trembling. I thought I was doing the right thing by balancing everything. I didn't mean to hurt him or you. I nodded slowly, letting her words settle into the room. Intentions are important, yes, but choices carry consequences. Being absent when your father needed you most, placing convenience and another person's priorities above his final moments, that is the measure of the impact. Love is not just claimed, It is demonstrated, lived, and acted upon. She shifted, the first visible sign of reflection crossing her face. I didn't realize. I thought missing a visit, missing the funeral for a birthday, wouldn't matter in the long run. I thought he would understand. I thought I could make it up later. You can try, I said softly. But understanding comes not from intention alone, it comes from awareness, from seeing the tangible effects of your choices. You cannot undo the days you were absent, but you can begin to acknowledge the consequences and learn from them. Her gaze met mine, hesitant, searching for something I could not give without her own recognition. So, it's my fault, she whispered, voice barely audible. All of this, the will, the everything. It is a reflection, not a judgment, I explained. It is the consequence of choices. If we place self-interest above family, above love, the bonds we rely on will fracture. Loyalty is not automatic. It is nurtured, maintained, and sometimes defended. Your father's absence now, the decisions I have made, are lessons you must absorb, not argue with. She exhaled, a shuddering breath, and the first hint of understanding softened her features. I see it now, she said slowly. I understand. I didn't fully grasp the impact of what I chose. I was selfish. Yes, I replied gently, feeling the tension begin to ease. Recognition is the first step. The next is action, how you live, how you choose, how you honor those who came before you. Choices define character, Cordelia, and it is never too late to learn, even if it is difficult. The room felt lighter, the confrontation receding into a quiet reflection. Cordelia sat still, absorbing the weight of her actions. The lesson clear, though challenging. I could see the first stirrings of remorse, the dawning awareness that her priorities had shaped her reality, and that understanding them was the beginning of real change. The week following our confrontation passed in an uneasy silence, punctuated only by Cordelia's sporadic calls. Each time she reached out, there was a subtle shift in her tone, a tentative curiosity, a fragile attempt to bridge the gap her choices had created. I could sense the conflict within her, the tug of war between the life she had built with Barnaby and the recognition of what she had neglected. One evening, she arrived unannounced, her presence tentative at the threshold. She looked smaller somehow. The confident aura Barnaby had nurtured diminished, replaced by uncertainty and hesitation. I motioned for her to sit in the living room, the familiar space now marked by months of absence and reflection. She placed her coat neatly on the rack, an almost automatic gesture. But it felt symbolic, a small attempt at order in a life that had been disrupted. I've been thinking, she began, voice low, almost afraid of the words, about everything, about Dad, about Mom, about the choices I've made. She paused, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, fingers twisting. I realize now how much I let other influences dictate my decisions, how I prioritized the wrong things. I nodded, allowing her the space to continue. It's difficult to see clearly when you're caught up in someone else's plans, their expectations, their values. I said, but recognition is the first step toward change. Understanding the influence of others is essential to reclaiming your own priorities. Cordelia looked down, swallowing hard. Barnaby. He always framed everything in terms of gain, reputation, appearances. I didn't realize how much I'd absorbed it, see how it had reshaped my priorities. I'm starting to see what I've lost in the process, the relationships I've neglected, the family that actually matters. Her voice cracked slightly, the weight of realization pressing against her. I can see that, I said softly, and seeing it is not enough. You have to act on it. It requires courage, and it requires honesty with yourself and with the people you've hurt. She exhaled, a shuddering breath that seemed to carry the tension of months. I want to do better, she admitted. I don't know exactly how yet, but I want to try. I want to reconnect, to make amends, to be the daughter you and Dad raised me to be, not the one who put convenience above love. The vulnerability in her words was palpable, a fragile transparency that I had not seen in years. It was a beginning, however hesitant. Change is not instant, Cordelia, I said. It is measured in steps, in consistent actions, in decisions made with awareness. You have to choose carefully, repeatedly, until the patterns of the past are replaced with new ones. She nodded slowly, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. I understand, she whispered. I need to distance myself from the influences that led me astray, to reflect on what truly matters. It will be hard, but I want to try. I want to be present, to honor Mom and Dad, and to reclaim the daughter I should have always been. I reached out, placing a hand lightly on her. This is your first step, and it is a significant one. The path ahead will not be easy, but the willingness to recognize the mistakes, to reflect, and to take responsibility, that is the beginning of true redemption. For the first time in months, the room felt less heavy, charged instead with cautious optimism. Cordelia sat quietly, absorbing the weight of her decisions, the clarity of her realization, and the small but undeniable resolve to reshape her priorities. It was the start of a transformation, a deliberate move toward the daughter she had been raised to be, and the one she had long neglected. The morning air was crisp as Cordelia stepped into the small library, her hands tucked into the pockets of a modest coat. The scent of paper and ink, warm and familiar, greeted her like an old friend. She had volunteered here before, but never with this purpose, never with this awareness of why she was truly returning. The children were already seated at low tables, books open, eyes bright with curiosity. Their energy was infectious, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of belonging untangled from obligation or status. She knelt beside a young boy struggling with a sentence, guiding his fingers along the words as he read aloud. See how the letters come together, she whispered gently. He nodded, a shy smile spreading across his face. The simple act of helping, of being present, brought a warmth she hadn't realized she'd missed. Each correct word, each flicker of understanding in the children's eyes, felt like a small redemption, a step toward reconciling with the person she had neglected to be. After a few hours, she organized a stack of donated books, labeling them carefully, making sure each title would find the right young reader. Her hands moved methodically, the physical labor grounding her, reminding her that change required action, not just reflection. She thought of her parents, of Marin and Walter, and the values they had instilled: kindness, diligence, the importance of giving. These weren't abstract lessons anymore. They were living principles she could embody through tangible effort. Later, she found herself back at her childhood home, the familiar streets and old oak trees, a reminder of where she had come from. Marin was in the kitchen, preparing tea, the kettle humming softly. Cordelia hesitated at the doorway, then entered, her steps slow and deliberate. She offered a tentative smile, hands folded in front of her. I wanted to come by, she said, voice quiet, to talk and to help, if you'll let me. Marin regarded her calmly, the tension of previous confrontations lingering in the air, but softened by the visible change in her daughter. You're here, she said simply. Acknowledging the gesture without immediate judgment, Cordelia nodded, a mixture of relief and vulnerability crossing her face. It was a small start, but a meaningful one, proof that her intentions were no longer empty promises. They spent the afternoon together, arranging flowers in the living room, sharing quiet conversation, laughter punctuating the air in subtle, healing bursts. Cordelia spoke of the children she had helped, the satisfaction she felt in making a tangible difference. Marin listened, offering gentle guidance and occasional encouragement, witnessing the sincerity in her daughter's actions. By evening, a tentative calm settled over the house. The shadows no longer felt oppressive. Instead, they framed the beginning of a fragile but real reconciliation. Cordelia understood that trust and connection would take time to rebuild, but in her hands-on efforts, in her willingness to step forward and act, the foundation was being laid. The path to redemption was neither instant nor easy, but it was underway, marked by each deliberate, sincere choice she made. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, warming the living room where Marin and Cordelia sat together, side by side, arranging flowers and sharing quiet conversation. The tension that had once dominated their interactions had softened into a tentative, steady rhythm. Cordelia's hands moved deliberately, placing each bloom with care, a reflection of the patience and thought she was now bringing to her relationship with her mother. "I never realized how much I took for granted," Cordelia said softly, glancing up at Marin. Her eyes held a mixture of remorse and determination, a sign that the lessons of absence and consequence had truly taken root. "Helping those children, seeing the difference I can make, it's opened my eyes to what really matters." Marin smiled gently, reaching out to touch her daughter's hand. "It's never too late to choose differently, Cordelia. Family, loyalty, and love. These are the things that endure, far beyond material possessions. You're making the choices now that show who you truly are." They spent the afternoon tending the garden Walter had loved, their laughter mingling with the hum of the neighborhood. Neighbors passed by, offering greetings, noting the warmth and life returning to the home. For the first time since Walter's passing, the house felt alive, not merely as a dwelling, but as a home restored by connection and care. Later, Cordelia helped Marin sort the final documents from the will, understanding and accepting that part of the inheritance would remain with the charitable organizations they had designated. "It feels right," she said quietly. "Even the gifts to the charities. It's what Dad would have wanted, what you both would have wanted." Marin nodded, a sense of peace settling in her chest. The hurt of the past had not vanished entirely, but it had transformed into understanding and compassion. In this moment, the family's true wealth became clear, not the house, not the savings, but the bonds they nurtured, the loyalty rebuilt, and the love freely given and received. As they stood together in the garden, Cordelia placing a final tulip beside Walter's favorite rose, Marin realized that healing had taken root. The family, fractured but resilient, had found its way back to one another. The journey had been difficult, but the connection, once neglected, now shone with a quiet, enduring strength.